Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I'm Catherine Brobeck.
I'm Kemper Donovan.
And this week we are tackling Mr. Parker Pyne. As longtime listeners know, one of, my favorites.
One of your adversaries, if not nemesis, on this podcast.
Man, Parker Pyne, the worst. Sorry to get all of you excited, listeners. Just to go right on in and express my unhappiness with Parker Pyne making other people happy.
I think that this story will prove that he is a formidable adversary, at the very least.
Yeah.
There's a lot happening in this one.
There is a lot happening in this one.
Shall we say what the title of the story is?
The Case of the Rich Woman. And it was first published yet again in that U.S. collection in Cosmopolitan in August 1932. Are You Happy? If Not, Consult Mr. Parker Pyne. It was published there under the title The Rich Woman Who Wanted Only to Be Happy. It doesn't appear to have been published individually in the UK until it appears in Parker Pyne Investigates in November 1934. Listeners can correct us if we're wrong about that.
And interestingly, my edition of Parker Pyne Investigates says that this was the first Parker Pyne story published in the USA in that Cosmopolitan series, which is interesting because the first two stories within this collection felt like they were the first since they had the newspaper advert.
Right, and this one does not.
Printed directly in the story, and this one does not. Although it does kind of go over the framing of what Parker Pyne does and how he advertises in the paper. So I suppose that's possible. But in any case, let's talk about our victim. And as is so often the case in a Parker Pyne story, especially in these earlier short stories in the collection, there isn't quite a victim because we don't have quite a puzzle mystery. But we perhaps have one very specific victim here who is our titular rich woman. I think rather than describe her victimhood, we should just get into the meat of the story and that will become very clear.
Right. And so our suspect, as far as there is one, is obviously Parker Pyne. So
that dastardly Parker Pyne.
I know. He's orchestrating this whole shebang, and boy, is he ever.
Boy, howdy. All right. So the world as it appears to be. Mrs. Abner Reimer, her first name is Amelia, shows up chez Parker Pyne with an unusual request. She is extremely rich. I'm assuming by the fact that her husband's name is Abner Reimer that he at least was an American.
I knew that you were going to say that, by the way.
I mean, he just must be. He has to be.
He's not, though. He grew up in their same, whatever, English countryside town. He worked his way up the ladder. That's how she met him, right?
But doesn't she sound a little... It's funny because you're absolutely right. They are not American, but they seem American adjacent. Christie presents Americans.
Yeah, they definitely do. Her clothes, even how her clothes are described, is
she's loud.
Yeah.
She's got some idiomatic phrases of speech, although not quite as hardcore as actual Americans in Christie thrillers. In any case, American adjacent. I'll leave it at that. She is extremely rich, and she doesn't know what else to do with her money. She's bought all the things that she could possibly buy, and she's lost her interest in life. She doesn't care about acquiring more furs or another yacht or another country estate. All of her friends from when she was poor are no longer her friends because they're intimidated by her or probably jealous of her. And her new friends mock her behind her back because she, of course, is nouveau riche. I was getting a distinct Kathy Bates in Titanic vibe.
I don't understand a one of you.
Oh, definitely. Her description even sounds like she could be Molly Brown.
Yeah, she could be the unsinkable Molly Brown. And that, of course, is such a trope. The pull herself up by her bootstraps, loud, rather obnoxious, but good-hearted, often American woman who doesn't quite fit in.
Right.
We've seen that in... Certainly, I don't think that James Cameron was inventing that character type when he wrote Titanic. Let's just leave it at that.
Well, I mean, the unsinkable Molly Brown was a real person.
Of course, but I think he was playing up that,
yeah, of course.
that element.
Well, who else would have shown Jack how to use all the forks?
Put these all for me. Just start from the outside and work your way in.
and dressed him in her son's tuxedo.
Right, correct.
A little more sadly, all 4 of her children died young, and her husband has also died. He, by the way, if you're curious how he made his money, he was the button shank king.
Abe Reimer, the button shank king of, northern England.
Is there a problem?
You're Abe Froman,
That's right. I'm Abe Froman.
the sausage king of Chicago.
Well, and we've come across the cucumber king of California in Christie before. I wasn't even sure what button shanks are, but they're those little metal loops that you get on the bottom of buttons for a little bit of extra space for the fabric to lie when it's buttoned, so it lies nice and flat. They're kind of like on fancy buttons. Just FYI.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Amelia does not want to donate her money to charities because, that money was worked hard for. That money was earned by selling lots of button shanks, I suppose. That's just not an option for her. And I have to admit, that struck a little bit of a false note to me as I was reading the story. I thought that was a little odd because that is, of course, a very obvious solution for super wealthy people. Just ask Bill and Melinda Gates. You donate a lot of your money.
Right.
And perhaps that discordant note will be resolved by the end of the story. We shall see.
But she's very strident about it, too.
Yeah.
So Parker Pyne suggests that for the modest fee of £1,000...
Whoa!
Right.
That's a big fee.
Parker Pyne raking it in on this one. He has an idea for her. And she reluctantly agrees to write him a check that very day. And she'll come back in a week, at which point he will present her with his solution as to how she can spend her fortune.
Right. I love the whipsawing from a £5 fee we had in the previous story to £1,000 in this one. It's pretty fantastic.
Parker Pyne all over the place.
Yeah. Amelia returns and a nurse named, wait for it, Nurse DeSarah. Uh-oh.
Yikes.
Never a good sign.
No.
Nurse DeSarah comes in. I imagine her wearing like a little nurse cap.
Oh, yeah. I also pictured her nurse uniform being slightly too tight.
Oh, she's definitely wearing a Halloween sexy nurse costume.
Right.
That's not a question.
Right. But she bought it at Spirit Halloween in one of those bags.
She bought it at one of those Halloween pop-up stores that you see and you're always like, what's here otherwise? But then you forget to look the other 11 months out of the year until it pops up again the next year. And you're like, no, but really, what was here?
They're always a former Blockbuster.
Right. Or it makes me think of how in Harry Potter buildings can appear all of a sudden. I was like, maybe that's how that works. But whoa, that was a tangent. In any case, Nurse DeSarah takes Amelia Reimer to her appointment with a Dr. Constantine. Now, we already know, obviously, that we're dealing with our old friend Madeline DeSarah here, and she's not really a nurse. But we should also know that, of course, Dr. Constantine is one of Parker Pyne's hired guns. He tells Amelia, however, that he is an Eastern doctor, not the Harley Street variety, but, something a bit more exotic. And that if she drinks some tea, double O,
yeah,
he's going to tell her all about happiness, how to get happy.
Stranger giving you tea or somebody you don't trust giving you tea. I had just seen The Favorite, and that was the very first thing I thought of, and I was like, oh no.
Or to reference an Oscar movie from a year or two back, it's like getting an omelet with extra mushrooms.
Oh, yeah. I think that was just last year, wasn't it?
Was it just last year?
Yes.
Seems longer.
I know. It's a very long 2018, my friend.
Oh, boy. Let's move on.
So Amelia wakes up in a strange, uncomfortable bed. Definitely not her posh bed. With the woman, Mrs. Gardner, rousing her awake because apparently they were worried about her. She's been out cold for 2 days. And Mrs. Gardner also calls her Hannah. And Amelia naturally insists, no, she's Amelia. She's Mrs. Abner Reimer. But basically to no avail. She's told that she's actually a peasant woman in Cornwall.
Yeah, it's kind of horrifying. It's like the opposite of the end of The Wizard of Oz, which I'm referencing only because I just happen to have seen the very end of The Wizard of Oz, from the Wicked Witch getting doused in water till that lovely black and white ending.
But it wasn't a dream. It was a place. And you were there.
Oh,
But you couldn't have been, could you?
This is sort of the horrifying nightmare version.
Right.
Yeah, so far, so very creepy. Mrs. Reimer reads a paper left in her room. Let's always take notice of a paper in Christie, because Mrs. Reimer reads the paper that's left for her in the room, and she sees a notice about herself. And the notice says that she, Mrs. Abner Reimer, widow of the Buttonshank King, apparently had a strange neurotic break wherein she imagined herself as a countrywoman named Hannah Morehouse, and that she was subsequently removed to a private home for mental cases, aka a loony bin. So Mrs. Reimer is pretty sure that what happened here is that Parker Pyne pulled off a switcheroo. She put Amelia herself in Hannah's place in Cornwall, and then had Hannah shipped off first from Cornwall to London and then into some asylum in London. And this is all so very The Woman in White, which makes me, of course, very happy.
Of course it would. But it gets even creepier, because in that same paper, she also sees a notice about Dr. Constantine and his experiments, wherein he claims you can switch the souls out of the bodies of two strangers who resemble each other, which is great. Since these look-alike strangers are in fact connected as like some kind of psychic twin, I suppose it's the concept a little bit of doppelgangers, right?
Yeah, it's like doppelgangers. It's like people who look alike are as potentially connected as actual twins who look identical.
Right.
Yeah, it's doppelgangers.
Yeah, meaning that when they wake up from this procedure, person A, Amelia Reimer, would be in Hannah Morehouse's body, and person B, Hannah Morehouse, would be in Amelia's body. And Amelia doesn't buy this at all. She reads this and is like, Dr. Constantine is a giant fraud, and this is a plot to get her money. And so she's convinced that poor Hannah Morehouse is imprisoned in an insane asylum as part of this plot. So when she asks Mrs. Gardner if there's any way other than her face of identifying her, she is appalled when Mrs. Gardner coolly references this strawberry birthmark just under her right elbow. And she says, well, I don't have a strawberry birthmark, but she looks, and sure enough, it's there. She bursts into tears. And by the way, she still thinks that this is all a plot. She does not believe that she switched bodies, but she thinks that Parker Pyne has entrapped her in this, and that he's a lot smarter and craftier than she realized, and that this is all a giant plot to get her money.
Yeah. I mean, the moment at which she looks and sees a permanent strawberry birthmark on her elbow that wasn't there before is when we're in near Twilight Zone territory. Mm-hmm. It's creepy.
It's really
creepy.
Yeah.
So obviously she needs to go to London to sort this out, except she has no money and no way to get to London. I think she has, a couple of shillings in an old purse. So this is a problem.
Yep. And given that the people in the house know her as Hannah, and given that she is in Cornwall, a place she's unfamiliar with, and the fact that these people have apparently photographs of her with them, she's essentially trapped in this house and forced to do farm labor in order to earn the wages that she'll need to get back to London. So this goes on for some time, and eventually, because she's being gaslit, I just want to be clear about this, she is being gaslit, she comes to enjoy the labor, and then she earns enough money to get the ticket back to London to confront Parker Pyne, but she decides to give it another week. And then another, and then another. And she meets Joe, who is a farmer with a drinking problem, who she cures of drink by the power of her love. It is suggested, although we have met this woman, so it also might just be force of nature preventing him from the pub. And he just knows her as Hannah, this country peasant woman, and this goes on for an entire year.
Well, we're at the end of the world as it appears to be. It's not really a legitimate question, but it is sort of a question whether or not Dr. Constantine's experiment was legitimate. Are we in the middle of a big or all of me?
We obviously have mutual control over our body.
Our body. It's my body. I'm not sharing my body with anyone.
Or I'm just going to keep on going because body switch comedies are some of my favorite movies ever. Vice versa.
I wish I could change places with you.
Well, I wish I could too.
The change up.
I was just saying that I envy your life, Mitch.
I envy yours.
I wish I had your life.
18 again.
He thinks like George Burns.
Maybe you'd rather be hang gliding or something.
What, with my arthritis?
But he looks a lot younger.
17 again.
No way. It's freaking me out.
Freaking me out! I'm pubescent! This is my chance to have my life over, but to do it right.
13 going on 30.
Maddie, it's Thriller!
We've all seen these sorts of stories where we're actually supposed to swallow that body switching is possible. Is that what has happened here? Is she in Hannah Morehouse's body?
Well,
what do you think, Catherine? Tell us about the world as it actually is.
We're in a Christie story, so there is a world as it actually is. And I think we can safely say that we are not as sad as I am to say in 13 going on 30.
Is that your favorite body switch comedy?
I think so. I mean, I suppose big is the obvious answer, but I think I'll go in for that like terrible Thriller dance off every time.
Oh boy. I'm partial to the Lindsay Lohan, Jamie Lee Curtis
Freaky Friday is really good.
I beg your pardon.
Oh, I'm like the Crypt Keeper!
It is good.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever actually seen the Jodie Foster one.
I wish I could switch places with her for just one day.
I have. We used to watch all those weird 1970s Disney movies when I was a kid. I have no idea why, but I've seen like all of those.
Like The Parent Trap, also the one with Haley Mills.
Yeah, The Parent Trap is a little bit this same plot. I mean, it's not like a soul switch. It's not like a body switching one, but it is a similar plot because they grow into their roles in their fake switched families.
Surprise!
Another Lindsay Lohan remake.
You and I are like sisters. Sisters. Hallie, we're like twins.
I know. Disney really milking those 1970s children's remakes for a while.
Yeah, and she did an excellent job with both of them. I'm not being in any way facetious when I say that.
Terrific movies.
Terrific movies.
Anyway, that aside, The World As It Actually is not a body switch movie, and it's not even actually a Parent Trap. On the year to the day she wakes up at the farm, she's doing farm work when Parker Pyne rolls up. And pretty understandably, she goes absolutely berserk on him, especially when discussing the fact that he now has power of attorney over her because she's technically in a mental hospital. And thus, Parker Pyne, for an entire year, has had access to the Button King's entire fortune. He insists he hasn't spent a dime, and in fact, he has the power of attorney paperwork, and she can have the paper back and rip it up right then and there. Although, if I were Amelia, I would not trust him for 1 second. I would think it was fake paperwork.
Seriously, this is worse than the Britney Spears ongoing conservatorship. So Amelia rails at him for a bit longer. She grabs this power of attorney paper, and it's revealed, of course, what we already knew, that not only were Nurse to Sarah and Dr. Constantine and Parker Pyne's pay, but Mrs. Gardner at the house is also in on it. Apparently, Parker Pyne previously helped keep her son from prison.
Right.
So, okay. He's good at collecting on his debts, isn't he?
You don't want to make some Faustian bargain with Parker Pyne.
No, it's dare I say, a little mobster-like.
It's very mobster-like. And also, like, the various amounts of money he charges, the sort of uneven practices that he just sort of pins on depending on who the person is, really does seem like the mob.
So she's just going on and on about it. She can't believe that he's done this to her. But then Parker Pyne asks her a very simple question. What is that question, Catherine?
He asks Amelia if she's been happy. Interesting question.
Appropriate, given we're in a Parker Pyne story.
And finally, she slows down, and the expression on her face, I guess, changes. And she has to reluctantly agree that, yeah, she became really happy. And to be completely honest, Joe was going to marry her. So she kind of finally realizes the little bit of magic of what Parker Pyne has done. Angie hands him back the power of attorney that, just to reiterate, notes that she is insane.
Mentally incapacitated.
Mentally incapacitated. Yeah. And then she tells him that if he gives her a few £100 for her account in Cornwall, she needs that money only so that she and Joe can buy a farm that they've been eyeing. Then Parker Pyne can donate the rest of her fortune to hospitals. And her only caveat to this is that Joe can never find out that she's not actually a woman named Hannah.
Right, because we should make clear that she finds out from Parker Pyne there is no Hannah. Right. Obviously, there's never been a Hannah. There's never been a Hannah, so there's no poor woman trapped in an insane asylum. So the only loose end here involves the man who she loves, in that he's going to be marrying a woman under false pretenses.
Correct.
But,
true love.
I mean, we've seen this before within the Parker Pyne verse, and it's this quasi-cynical / darkly humorous take on romance and love, which is that love doesn't necessarily need a foundation of truth to flourish and last.
Yeah, it's basically like you can trick somebody, and if it makes them happy, long live the con.
We came across it in the first or second Parker Pyne story, and I referenced Midsummer Night's Dream, which is built on the same foundation, where those lovers at the end, at least one pair are in love because of a love potion, not because they're actually organically in love. But it just doesn't matter because everyone's happy at the end. And it's funny, but it's also dark because it's so cynical about love. And that's very much in keeping with these Parker Pyne stories.
There's something just so creepy about this story. It goes beyond the creepiness that is in some other Parker Pyne stories. I famously, I think, went on a tear about, was it the discontented husband?
Mm-hmm.
That one upset me. This one creeps me out. Here's my question. Do we actually know she's been happy? I mean, we're told that she's happy, but the woman's been gaslit for a year.
I mean, obviously the point is that she's
back to her roots and got to do some hard, honest labor and got to give up her furs. Well, she was also basically kept prisoner in a farmhouse.
I know. What's creepy about it is that he imprisoned this woman and she was taught to like her cage.
Correct. Yes.
And she is going to live out the rest of her years in that cage that Parker Pyne put her in.
Mm-hmm. She did not decide to go to Cornwall. She did not make that choice. And yes, obviously she wanted his help, but I don't know that she wanted him to design the rest of her life.
I know, but she came to him saying, I'm unhappy. I'm fundamentally unhappy. I feel like I'm in a cage already. So you could argue that he put her in a better cage and now she's happier. The lesson that we, I think, are supposed to glean from this in a lighter fashion is that she was the poor little rich girl or the poor older rich woman whose wealth and riches were holding her back. And Parker Pyne, ironically, by divesting her of all of that, let her free. And now she will be happy. It's why Warren Buffett didn't leave any money to his children. Such a relatable tale, right?
Right, such a relatable tale.
Because so many of us have too much money.
Right. Don't the Gates have also a plan that their children only get so much? It's a controlled income about how that's going to be given since they're giving away the bulk of it?
Probably. I mean, it is a valid point. I think most people would agree that wealth has almost like a bell curve where having more money makes your life easier and smoother up to a certain point, after which it starts getting more complicated and actually messing you up.
Well, there's
in ways and making your life harder.
I'm pretty sure there's legitimately several psychological and economic studies about where that mark is, because there's legitimately a financial point, and I forget what the amount of money is. But after that point, either people are certainly not happier, and in some cases significantly less happy. So, I mean,
yeah,
it's valid, but I mean, I think that the reality is it's only valid if you're making that choice. I mean, she's had that decision taken away from her, and Parker Pyne now has her whole fortune.
It's creepy that it had to involve a conservatorship essentially.
Right.
But he does give her the option. If she didn't fall in love with Joe and she didn't want to spend the rest of her life with him, she could go back to the way it was. He's not holding her back. And she does choose. She makes the choice not to.
Again, if you believe that after a year of living in those circumstances.
You just think she's been beaten down and brainwashed.
Yeah, I do.
I think that's a fair reading. I get it. I don't think we're meant to read it that way, but who cares how we're meant to read it? I certainly think that's a fair reading.
Also, that he very casually says, oh, yeah, we put some kind of hash in your tea, but then after you got kind of out of it from the hash in your tea, we gave you a ton of extra drugs and took you to Cornwall.
I know.
Parker Pyne should be arrested.
Oh, he should 100% be arrested. I mean, her saying, I want you to try to make my life better did not equal permission to be drugged.
And held hostage. No.
And held hostage.
No, it really didn't. I mean, this really just goes to all of my previous thoughts that are basically that Parker Pyne is a criminal.
But remember how lovely he was in the case of the city clerk? By the way, the other way in which that story is the inverse of this one is that he lost so much money in the case of the city clerk. He made bank on this one because given that Mrs. Gardner was already in his debt, I don't think he had to pay her much. And Dr. Constantine and Madeline DeSara are already in his employ. I feel like he probably only had to lay out way less than 100 pounds on this.
Oh,
way
yeah.
Less.
Oh, for sure. And also, let's be honest, we don't think he's skimming off some of that giant bank account that he now has access to.
Which he's been investing, and he notes that she's
now a richer woman. Yeah. So we have no idea.
He's skimming.
Yeah, he's skimming. Yeah. I mean, this goes actually a very long way. We've thought about this before. Like, how does Parker Pyne make money? And, we had a previous theory that, especially in the city clerk one, that, well, he seems to be getting money from the British government.
Right, for espionage services.
Yeah, for espionage services. But it seems also in this case that since he's a grifter to begin with, let's be honest, this seems like to go a long way to explaining his bank account.
True. We're never actually told that he gives the money to charity either.
No.
She makes the request, but...
Yeah, but how will she know? It's not like she has an internet or they probably won't even have a phone in their tiny farm that they've been trying to save up money to buy.
But she'll be happy because she's living the simple life again with a reformed drunk who she knows wouldn't be able to handle all that money too. That's really the real reason.
Oh no, I know. And that's
all her money.
Well, and that's also such a concerning thing where she's like, well, I can't tell him who I am and we can't have any money because he would just go nuts on it. And it's like
basically have a coke binge orgy.
Oh yeah,
fest.
Like Wolf of, he's gonna go Wolf of Wall Street if he finds out who I am, and so
that's the man she wants to spend the rest of her life with.
Yeah.
Oh, Parker Pyne, you really just don't disappoint, do you?
Oh man, every time. I'm so sorry to our listeners who just have to hear me go, ugh. Every time Parker Pyne comes up. The city clerk was such a rare exception.
Well, next time we visit Parker Pyne, we will be abroad. So we will be puzzle mysterying a bit more with him. And I think that those stories will go down a bit easier in your craw, Catherine.
I believe that they will.
That is the case of the rich woman. So join us next week. We will be revisiting another friend from a little side pocket verse within the greater Christieverse. That would be, of course, the mysterious Mr. Quinn.
And don't forget about Mr. Satterthwaite.
Oh, I would never forget about Mr. Satterthwaite. That story is The Voice in the Dark. Sounds spooky.
Intriguing.
Of course, our next novel will be Five Little Pigs immediately after that. Catherine is, I'm never quite sure if it's chomping or champing at the bit, but let's just say she's doing both. She's both chomping and champing.
I know. It's just real bitey.
That bit is bitten.
I know. Although that makes it sound like I want to rip at it when instead the reality is I just am very eager, as I think longtime listeners know. We'll see if it holds up to expectations because Man, it would be pretty devastating otherwise, Kemper.
We haven't even done the episode yet, and I'm already uncomfortable, but okay. I'm already freaked out by
my enthusiasm.
This is the big one for Catherine, folks.
Right. So be prepared for my absolute devastation, and be prepared to send me sympathy emails if that doesn't go well for us.
Oh, well, I'm already sharpening arguments for lower rankings than 10s across the board. Have no fear.
I think it's only reasonable that we balance each other out.
That will be our next novel, and we would love to hear from you, of course. Before then, we always love hearing from listeners. You can email us at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. We're on Facebook. Our Facebook page is All About Agatha. Our Twitter handle is at All About the Dame, and Catherine's Twitter handle is Brobcat. Talk to her about Five Little Pigs. She will definitely reply to any Five Little Pigs related tweets. You can find us on Instagram at All About Agatha, and we would also so appreciate any ratings and reviews wherever you're listening to this podcast to help other people find it and revel in all of the Christie fandom. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.